I'm Kelly Davis, 32, a freelance marketer, and I thought I was ready for my mom's 60th birthday dinner. It was supposed to be a night to mend things, to show up for my family, despite years of feeling like I didn't exist. I walked into that Italian restaurant in Seattle, my heart pounding, clutching a small gift box I'd planned to give my mom. But then my parents stood up, raised their glasses, and toasted to my sister as their only child. The words hit like a slap. Everyone cheered. My sister beamed. My parents smiled, and I sat there invisible again. I could have walked out right then, but something snapped. I stood up my chair, scraping the floor, and slid that gift box across the table to my grandmother, who'd always seen me. I leaned in and whispered, "Open it later." But my sister grabbed it, tore it open, and the room went dead silent. Before I share my story, tell me, what time is it where you are, and what city are you watching from? I'd love to know how far this story travels. Sitting there at that dinner, the sting of my parents' words brought it all back, the years of being the shadow in my own family. Growing up in Seattle, I was always the afterthought next to my sister Jennifer Davis. She was the star, the one who could do no wrong. I was 9 when I first noticed it. We'd both bring home report cards, mine with solid B's, hers with shining A's. My parents would pin Jennifer's to the fridge, gushing about her future at Ivy League schools. Mine, they'd glance at it, say good job, and move on. Once I overheard my mom tell a neighbor Jennifer's our scholar. I stood there clutching my math test with a hard-earned B+ and felt like I'd vanished. School wasn't much better. In 5th grade, I joined the spelling bee, practicing for weeks. I made it to the final round, but my parents didn't show up. They were at Jennifer's piano recital, cheering her on. I stood on that stage, scanning the crowd for them, my heart sinking when I realized they'd forgotten. The teacher, Mrs. Larson, gave me a pitying look and a second-place ribbon. I tucked it into my backpack and never showed it to anyone. That same year, Jennifer won first in her recital. My parents threw a party for her, complete with a cake and balloons. My ribbon stayed buried in my drawer. Birthdays were the worst. When I turned 12, I begged for a small party, just a few friends at the arcade. My mom said they were too busy, so I spent the day alone in my room eating a cupcake Dorothy Clark, my grandmother, had baked for me. Dorothy was the one who remembered. She'd show up with her warm smile, a homemade card, and stories about her teaching days. She'd sit with me braiding my hair, telling me I was enough. That year, she gave me a journal to write my thoughts, saying, "You've got a voice, Kelly, even if they don't hear it." I still have that journal, filled with pages of dreams I thought I'd never chase. Jennifer's birthdays were different. Her 12th was a blowout rented venue catering a DJ. My parents invited half the neighborhood, boasting about her leadership in the school play. I was there helping set up tables because my dad said it'd keep me busy. Nobody noticed when I slipped away to the corner, watching Jennifer open her gifts: a new bike, a charm bracelet. I got a pair of socks from my mom that year, handed to me a week late, with an apology about how hectic things were. High school brought more of the same. I joined the debate team, thinking it'd finally get their attention. I won a regional competition at 16, my first real victory. I called home, excited, hoping they'd be proud. My dad picked up, said, "That's nice." Kelly then handed the phone to my mom, who was too busy planning Jennifer's college application party. Jennifer was applying to Stanford, and the house was a shrine to her essays and awards. My trophy sat on my desk, gathering dust. I stopped trying to show them after that. But there was always Dorothy. She'd drive me to debate practice when my parents forgot, sitting in her old sedan, with a thermos of tea, cheering me on from the bleachers. She'd tell me stories of her own childhood, how she fought to be seen in a big family. "You don't need their spotlight," she'd say. "You make your own." Her words kept me going, gave me a reason to keep pushing. Then there was Matthew Harris, my boyfriend since junior year. We met in history class, paired up for a project on the Civil War. He saw me, the real me, not the shadow of Jennifer. When my parents skipped my 17th birthday to take Jennifer on a college tour, Matthew showed up with a pizza and a playlist of my favorite songs. We sat on my porch laughing until midnight, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone. He'd call me after every debate match, win or lose, telling me I was unstoppable. Matthew and Dorothy. They were my anchors, the ones who made me believe I could be more than the kid my parents overlooked. Those years taught me something. No matter how hard I tried, I'd never be Jennifer in their eyes. But Dorothy and Matthew showed me I didn't have to be. They saw me when no one else did, and that's why years later, I made the choice I did at that dinner. I walked into the Italian restaurant in Seattle, the weight of the small gift box in my purse heavier than it should have been. The place was alive with chatter, clinking glasses, and the faint smell of garlic and fresh bread. My mother, Susan, had planned her 60th birthday dinner down to the last detail: rustic wooden tables, warm lighting, a private room for the family. I'd hoped this night would be a chance to bridge the gap, to show her I could be part of this family. The box held something special, something I thought would make her see me. My sister Jennifer was already there, holding court at the center table like she was born for it. She wore a tailored navy dress, her hair swept up in a way that screamed effortless perfection. Guests gravitated toward her, laughing at her stories about her latest promotion at the bank. My father, Thomas, stood by her side, nodding proudly as she talked about her corner office. My mom was right there too, adjusting Jennifer's necklace, whispering something that made them both smile. They were a unit, a perfect trio, and I was just a guest in their world. I scanned the room for my grandmother, Dorothy. She was tucked at a small table near the back, next to a cousin I barely recognized. Dorothy looked out of place in her simple cardigan, her silver hair pinned neatly, her hands folded quietly. She'd raised me when my parents were too busy with Jennifer, yet here she was, relegated to the sidelines. I waved at her, and she gave me a warm nod, her eyes crinkling with that familiar kindness. It made my chest ache. She deserved so much more than this. I took a seat near the edge of the main table, close enough to be part of the group but far enough to go unnoticed. My mom was too busy directing the waiters, making sure every plate was perfect. My dad was deep in conversation with Jennifer's friend, a woman in a sharp blazer who hung on his every word. Nobody acknowledged me as I sat down, my purse with the gift box resting on my lap. I'd spent weeks planning this gesture, thinking it'd show my mom I wasn't just the kid who faded into the background. I imagined her opening it, her eyes lighting up, maybe even a thank you that felt real. The dinner started and the room buzzed with energy. Jennifer was the star, as always. She stood to thank everyone for coming, her voice confident, her smile dazzling. Guests raised their glasses, toasting to my mom's milestone, but it was Jennifer they watched. My parents beamed their pride, spilling over as they clapped for her. I watched my mom lean over to my dad, whispering about how Jennifer had organized the guest list. It was like I wasn't even there. Dorothy caught my eye from her corner, her expression soft, but knowing, like she could see the hurt I was trying to hide. I gripped the gift box under the table, my fingers tracing its edges. I'd meant it for my mom, a way to say I was still her daughter, still trying to matter. But as I watched Jennifer soak up the attention, my parents hanging on her every word, something shifted. The room felt smaller, the laughter louder, and I was shrinking again. Dorothy's quiet presence at the back table was a reminder of who'd always been there, who'd never made me feel less. I glanced at her, then at the box, and a thought started to form, one I hadn't planned, but one that felt right. The waiters brought out the main course plates of pasta and grilled vegetables, and the conversation turned to Jennifer's latest achievements. My dad bragged about her recent deal at the bank, how she was on track for another promotion. My mom chimed in, saying she'd always known Jennifer was destined for greatness. I sat there picking at my food, the gift box burning a hole in my lap. I wanted to stand up to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Not yet. I looked at Dorothy again, her quiet strength steadying me. This night wasn't going the way I'd planned, but I wasn't ready to give up on that gift box or what it could mean. The chatter in the restaurant softened as my mom stood her wine glass catching the flicker of the candles. She smoothed her dress, her smile practiced and bright, and raised her glass to the room. "Thank you all for being here." Susan began, her voice steady, to celebrate my 60th birthday and the family we've built. I shifted in my seat, hoping for a moment where I'd feel seen. Then she turned to my sister Jennifer, her face glowing with pride. "To Jennifer, our only child who makes every day brighter." The words hit like a stone, heavy and sharp, stealing my breath. The room burst into applause, glasses clinking, voices cheering. Jennifer stood, her navy dress catching the light, her smile as polished as ever. She basked in the attention, nodding graciously. My dad joined in, his voice booming over the noise. "To Jennifer," Thomas said, "our greatest joy." My hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. I glanced at my grandmother Dorothy, seated at the back table, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet understanding. She knew what those words meant. She'd seen me fade into the background my whole life. I tried to swallow the hurt, but it lodged in my throat. Our only child wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a public erasure in front of family and friends. The applause rang in my ears, but all I could hear was the echo of those words. They weren't just about tonight. They were every moment my parents had chosen Jennifer over me, every time they'd celebrated her while I stood on the sidelines. I remembered the countless times I'd tried to win their approval, staying late to finish a project, sharing my small victories, only to be met with half-hearted nods or quick changes of subject. Jennifer raised her glass, her voice clear and confident. "Thank you, Mom, Dad," she said, her eyes scanning the room but never landing on me. "I'm so honored to be your daughter, to carry your legacy." The guests clapped again, some standing there, admiration for her spilling over. My dad clapped hardest, his smile wide, the kind of pride I'd never felt aimed at me. My mom reached for Jennifer's hand, their connection a wall I couldn't breach. My chest tightened, anger and pain twisting together, years of being overlooked rushing back. I looked at Dorothy again, her hands still folded, her gaze steady. She'd been there through every dismissal, every time my parents looked through me. Her quiet presence grounded me, keeping me from unraveling. But those words, "our only child," cut deeper than I expected. They'd said it in front of everyone, as if I didn't exist, as if my place in this family was a footnote. It was a public rejection, a confirmation of what I'd always feared: I'd never be enough for them. I wanted to stand, to demand an explanation, to ask why they could say something so cruel. But my body felt heavy, my voice trapped. I'd spent years pushing down this pain, telling myself I could keep trying, that one day they'd see me. But watching my parents lift Jennifer up while I sat invisible, I felt that hope crumble. This wasn't just a moment, it was a lifetime of being second, of being less. I thought of all the times I'd tried to prove myself only to be brushed aside. Their words tonight made it clear I was never part of their story. The applause faded and Jennifer launched into a story about her latest success at the bank, her voice carrying the room. My mom laughed, leaning in, completely captivated. My dad added details, making her achievements sound even grander. I sat there, my hands still gripping the table, my heart pounding. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent much longer. Dorothy's eyes met mine again, a flicker of strength in her gaze, like she was urging me to stand up for myself. Something was stirring inside me, a resolve, a spark, and it was about to change the course of this night. I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room turned to me, conversations halting, eyes narrowing in confusion. My heart pounded, but I didn't care. I pulled the small velvet-lined gift box from my purse, its weight grounding me. I took a step toward Dorothy's table, the crowd parting slightly, and slid the box across the polished wood to her. "This is for you," I said, my voice steady but soft, meant only for her. "Open it later." Dorothy's eyes widened, her hands hovering over the box, a mix of surprise and warmth in her expression. Before she could respond, Jennifer lunged forward, her smile gone. "What's this?" she snapped, snatching the box from the table. My mom's gaze sharpened and my dad leaned forward, his brow furrowed. I opened my mouth to protest, but Jennifer was already tearing at the ribbon, ripping the lid open. The room fell silent, the clatter of dishes and murmurs of guests replaced by a heavy stillness. Inside the box was a folded note, crisp and official. Jennifer unfolded it, her eyes scanning the page, and her face froze. "It's a bank transfer," she said, her voice sharp, almost accusing. $75,000. Gasps rippled through the room. She held up the note, her hands shaking. "To Dorothy Clark." The silence deepened, every eye darting between me, Dorothy, and the note. My mom's glass slipped slightly in her hand, her lips parting in disbelief. My dad's face hardened, his jaw tight. Dorothy stared at the note, her hands trembling, tears welling in her eyes. I stood still, my pulse racing, but I felt a strange calm. This wasn't for them, it was for her. Dorothy, who'd braided my hair when I was forgotten, who'd given me a journal to write my dreams, who'd never made me feel less. The $75,000 was every cent I'd saved from years of freelance marketing, every late night and side hustle. I'd meant it for my mom, a desperate bid to win her approval. But in that moment, I knew Dorothy deserved it more. She'd been my family when no one else was. Jennifer's voice cut through the silence. "You're giving this to her?" she demanded, her eyes flashing with disbelief. "After everything Mom and Dad have done," I met her gaze unflinching. "You don't get to decide who I choose," I said, my voice low but firm. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others staring. My mom's face flushed, her eyes darting to the note in Jennifer's hand. "What is this about?" Susan asked, her tone sharp, almost wounded. My dad stood, his voice cold. "This is absurd." Kelly Thomas said, his words clipped. "Explain yourself." I turned to Dorothy, ignoring them. Her hands clutched the note now. Her eyes locked on mine, filled with a gratitude that made my chest ache. "You've always seen me," I said to her, loud enough for the room to hear. "This is for you." Dorothy's lips trembled and she nodded, unable to speak. The room stayed frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Jennifer dropped the note back into the box, her face a mix of shock and anger. My parents stood speechless, their perfect celebration shattered. I didn't plan for it to happen like this, but there was no going back. The note, the money, the choice, it was all out in the open now. I'd spent years trying to fit into their world, to be the daughter they noticed. But in that moment, I chose the one person who'd never needed me to prove anything. The silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken questions, and I knew this was only the beginning of what would come next. The restaurant was a vacuum of silence, the weight of the open gift box still hanging in the air. My sister Jennifer stood frozen, the note declaring the $75,000 transfer to Dorothy trembling in her hand. Her face twisted, her usual composure replaced by a flash of fury. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice cutting through the stillness. "You're throwing away that kind of money on her." She flung the note onto the table, her eyes blazing as they locked on me. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their whispers barely audible, but I held her gaze, refusing to back down. My mom's face was a storm of emotions, shock, confusion, and something like betrayal. Susan stood, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her voice low but sharp. "Kelly, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her eyes darting between me and the note. "You think this is the time for grand gestures?" Her tone carried a sting, as if I'd personally insulted her celebration. My dad rose beside her, his expression cold, his voice heavier than I'd ever heard it. "This is unacceptable," Thomas said, his words clipped. "You don't get to upstage your mother's night like this." I turned to my grandmother Dorothy, who sat at the back table, her hands clutching the note. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. Her eyes shone with a quiet, overwhelming gratitude, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. "Kelly," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you didn't have to do this." But the way she looked at me like I'd given her the world told me she understood why. Dorothy had been my rock, the one who'd never let me feel invisible. Seeing her like this moved beyond words, made every second of this moment worth it. Jennifer wasn't done. She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the floor, her voice rising. "You're making a spectacle," she hissed, her hands clenched. This was supposed to be Mom's night, not some stunt to get attention. Her words stung, but they didn't surprise me. She'd always been the center of everything, the one my parents saw. To her, my choice was an attack, not a tribute to the woman who'd raised me when no one else did. I kept my voice even, looking straight at her. "This isn't about you," I said. "It's about who's been there for me." Susan's face reddened, her fingers tightening around her glass. "You're being selfish," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "This is my birthday, Kelly. You couldn't just let it be." Her words hit hard, but they didn't waver my resolve. I'd spent years trying to please her, to fit into her world, but her accusation only sharpened the truth. She'd never seen me the way she saw Jennifer. My dad stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You owe your mother an explanation," Thomas said, his tone a mix of disbelief and disapproval. "This isn't how we do things in this family." The guests were silent, some staring at their plates, others glancing nervously between us. The tension was palpable. A tight wire stretched across the room. Dorothy reached for my hand, her grip warm and steady, grounding me in the chaos. "You're a good girl," she said softly, her voice cracking with emotion. "You've always been enough." Her words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of doubt. I squeezed her hand, ignoring the glares from my parents and sister. Jennifer crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "You think this makes you look noble?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Giving away that much money to prove a point, I didn't answer. There was no point arguing with her, she'd never understand. My mom shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from hurt or anger. "We'll talk about this later," Susan said, her voice final, like she was closing the door on me. My dad nodded, his face a mask of disappointment, and sat back down, signaling for the waiters to resume service. The room stayed quiet, the clatter of dishes sounding hollow in the heavy atmosphere. Dorothy kept the note close, her fingers tracing its edges, her eyes still on me. I stood there, feeling the weight of every stare, every unspoken judgment. I hadn't planned to disrupt the night like this, but I didn't regret it. For the first time, I'd chosen to honor the one person who'd always chosen me. The tension hung thick, no one daring to break the silence, and I knew this moment had changed our family forever. The tension from the dinner lingered like a fog, but the real fallout started the next morning. I woke to my phone buzzing with notifications, the screen lighting up with a post from my mom's social media account. Susan had shared a cryptic message on her public profile. "Some people think grand gestures make up for disrespect. Family is about loyalty, not stunts." The post had dozens of likes and vague comments from her friends, all hinting at the drama from the night before. My stomach churned as I read it, knowing it was aimed at me. She'd turned our private conflict into a public jab, painting me as the ungrateful daughter. By noon, the story had spread further. My sister Jennifer had taken it to another level, as always. I got a call from my cousin Michael Harris, his voice urgent. "Kelly, you need to see this," he said, forwarding me a screenshot from a group chat. Jennifer's friend Laura Bennett had posted in a local community thread, spinning a tale about how I'd stolen the spotlight at my mom's birthday with a calculated move to humiliate the family. The post didn't name me directly, but the details were unmistakable. A selfish act involving a large sum of money meant to overshadow a milestone celebration. Comments piled up, some calling it tacky, others questioning my motives. Jennifer had clearly fed Laura the story, twisting my gift to Dorothy into something cruel. I sat on my couch, staring at the screenshots, my hands shaking. I'd expected pushback, but not this. My mom's post was bad enough, but Jennifer's move felt like a betrayal carved in stone. She wasn't just angry, she was rewriting the narrative to make me the villain. Laura's post was gaining traction, shared by people I barely knew, each comment adding fuel to the fire. I could almost hear Jennifer's voice behind it, her confidence from the dinner now weaponized into gossip that spread like wildfire. Michael texted again, his message blunt. "Jennifer's telling everyone you did it to hurt Mom. Be careful." I appreciated his warning, but it didn't soften the blow. Michael had always been the one family member who checked in, who didn't pick sides. His text was a reminder that not everyone had bought into Jennifer's story, but it also meant the rift was growing. I opened my laptop, tempted to respond to Susan's post to set the record straight. But what could I say? That I'd given my life savings to Dorothy because she'd been my true family, that my mom and sister had spent years erasing me. The truth felt too raw for a public reply. Instead, I messaged Dorothy. "Are you okay?" I typed, my fingers hesitating. Her reply came quickly. "I'm more than okay, Kelly. You gave me something I'll never forget." Her words brought a lump to my throat. I pictured her at home, the note still in her hands, her quiet strength unshaken by the drama. Dorothy didn't have social media, didn't know about Susan's post or Laura's gossip. She was untouched by their venom, and that gave me a small anchor in the storm. But the storm was growing. By evening, Susan's post had been shared by relatives I hadn't seen in years, each adding their own spin. One aunt commented, "Families should lift each other up, not tear down." Another cousin wrote, "Some people need to grow up." It was clear they'd heard Jennifer's version through Laura, not the truth. I felt exposed, judged by people who didn't know the years of hurt behind my choice. Jennifer had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Now she was using that to turn my act of love into a scandal. I called Michael, needing to hear a friendly voice. "They're blowing it out of proportion," he said, his tone steady but concerned. "Jennifer's telling Laura you planned this to ruin the party. Mom's not helping, she's hurt, but she's making it worse online." I nodded, though he couldn't see me, the weight of it all pressing down. "What do I do?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "Just don't engage," he said. "Let it die down. You know why you did it." His words were practical, but they didn't ease the ache of being misunderstood. I scrolled through Laura's post again, the comments piling up. Each one felt like a jab, a reminder that my family's narrative had always excluded me. Susan's musing about loyalty stung the most. She'd never questioned Jennifer's place, but mine was always conditional. I thought about Dorothy, about the note now in her possession, and felt a flicker of resolve. I hadn't done this to hurt anyone. I'd done it to honor the one person who'd never made me feel like I had to earn my place. But as the gossip spread and the accusations grew, I knew this was far from over. 2 days after the dinner, my doorbell rang sharply in the late afternoon. I opened the door to find my mom and dad standing on my porch, their faces set in hard lines. Susan's arms were crossed, her eyes narrowed with a mix of anger and determination. Thomas stood beside her, his posture rigid, his jaw tight. I knew this wasn't a casual visit. "We need to talk." My mom said, her voice clipped, brushing past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation. My dad followed, his silence heavier than words. I closed the door, my pulse quickening. The air in my small apartment felt thick as they sat on my couch, their presence filling the space. "You need to undo that transfer." Susan started, her tone sharp. "Giving $75,000 to Dorothy without discussing it with us, it's reckless and disrespectful." Her words stung, but I'd expected them. My dad leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Kelly, this isn't just about the money," Thomas said. "It's about family. You blindsided us, and we deserve an explanation." I stood by the kitchen counter, gripping its edge to steady myself. Their accusations weren't new, but hearing them in my own home hit differently. "You think I did this to hurt you?" I said, keeping my voice even. "But it wasn't about you. It was about Dorothy." My mom's eyes flashed. "Dorothy doesn't need that kind of money," she snapped. "She's fine. You're throwing away your savings to make a point, and it's tearing this family apart. I took a deep breath, the weight of years pressing down. I'm not tearing anything apart, I said, my voice rising slightly. I gave that money to Dorothy because she's the one who's been there for me. When I was a kid, she listened when no one else did. She showed up when you didn't. My dad's face darkened. That's unfair, Thomas said, his voice cutting. We've done everything for you and your sister. You can't just rewrite history to justify this. I shook my head, the frustration boiling over. I'm not rewriting anything, I said. Dorothy was the one who helped me with homework when you were busy praising Jennifer. She was the one who noticed when I was struggling, who made me feel like I mattered. That money was my choice. My savings, because she deserves it more than anyone. My mom's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes glistening, but she didn't interrupt. For the first time, she seemed to hear me, even if she didn't want to. You could have talked to us? Susan said, her voice softer but still accusing. Instead, you made a spectacle at my birthday. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. I met her gaze, unflinching. I didn't plan to make a scene, I said. I brought that gift for you originally. But when you called Jennifer your only child, something broke. I couldn't keep pretending I was part of your story when you've never seen me. Thomas stood, his hands clenched. That's enough, he said. You don't get to throw that in our faces. We've always treated you fairly. His words felt like a wall shutting me out. I wanted to scream, to list every moment they'd overlooked me, but I held back. Instead, I said, Dorothy never made me feel like I had to earn her love. That's why I chose her. The money's hers, and I'm not taking it back. My mom's face crumpled, a mix of hurt and anger. You're punishing us, she said, her voice breaking. You think this fixes anything? I shook my head, my throat tight. This isn't about fixing things, I said. It's about doing what's right for someone who's always been there. You don't get to decide what I do with my money. My dad started to speak, but Susan touched his arm, stopping him. They stood there, silence heavy, and moved toward the door. As they left, my mom turned back, her eyes searching mine. We'll talk again when you're ready to be reasonable, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I didn't respond, letting the door close behind them. I sank onto the couch, my heart pounding, but a strange calm settled over me. I'd said what I needed to, not for them, but for me. A week after my parents' visit, the ripples of that night began to reshape our family. My cousin Michael texted me late one evening, his message short but loaded. Laura's done with Jennifer. She's not the only one. I called him to get the full story. Apparently, Laura Bennett, Jennifer's friend who'd spread those rumors online, had grown tired of her constant need for validation. Michael said Laura had stopped responding to Jennifer's texts, calling her too dramatic after the dinner fallout. Word spread among their circle, and others followed suit, distancing themselves from my sister. At work, Jennifer's polished image took a hit. Michael heard from a mutual friend that her colleagues at the bank had started whispering about her role in the family drama. The story of her grabbing the gift box and airing our private conflict had leaked, painting her as petty and attention-seeking. A promotion she'd been chasing, a senior role she'd bragged about for months, slipped away. The bank chose someone else, citing team dynamics as a factor. Jennifer's golden child status, which had always carried her, was cracking under the weight of her own actions. My parents weren't faring much better. Susan and Thomas had leaned on their extended family for years, relying on their support for everything from holiday gatherings to business connections. But the dinner, followed by my mom's public post and the rumors Jennifer fueled, shifted how relatives saw them. Michael told me that our aunts and uncles had started pulling back, declining invitations to my parents' usual barbecues. One uncle, who'd always been close to Susan, called her out for airing family issues online, saying it was tasteless. Another cousin refused to lend Thomas money for a new business venture he'd been pitching, citing trust issues. Their social standing, once solid, was crumbling. The financial strain hit them harder than I expected. Michael mentioned that my dad's latest project, a small real estate deal, had fallen through when a key investor backed out, likely influenced by the family gossip. Susan's part-time consulting work, which she'd always done for extra income, dried up as clients distanced themselves from the drama. They'd always lived comfortably, but without the support of relatives and their usual network, they were scrambling to cover expenses. I didn't feel vindicated, just hollow, watching the family I'd once tried to please unravel from their own choices. Meanwhile, Dorothy was the one constant that kept me grounded. I visited her a few days after my parents' confrontation, sitting in her cozy living room as she made tea. The bank transfer note sat framed on her mantel, a quiet testament to what I'd done. "I'm keeping it," Dorothy said, her voice firm but warm. "Not because of the money, Kelly, but because it's from you." She'd already met with her financial advisor, ensuring the $75,000 was secure in a savings account. She planned to use it for small comforts, a new hearing aid, a trip to see her sister. Things she'd never splurged on. Her gratitude wasn't loud, but it was real, and it steadied me. I didn't gloat over Jennifer's or my parents' struggles. Part of me wanted to reach out to bridge the gap, but their words from that night and their actions since kept me at a distance. Susan hadn't posted anything new online, and Thomas hadn't called. Jennifer, from what Michael said, was doubling down, telling anyone who'd listen that I'd betrayed the family. But her audience was shrinking, and the more she pushed, the more she isolated herself. I wondered if she'd ever see her part in this, but I wasn't holding my breath. Sitting with Dorothy, I felt a shift in myself. I'd spent years chasing my family's approval, trying to fit into their world. But watching them face the consequences of their actions, Jennifer's lost promotion, my parents' strained relationships and finances, I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. Dorothy's quiet support, her hand squeezing mine as we sipped tea, was enough. The money was hers, a choice I'd made, not to hurt anyone, but to honor the one person who'd always seen me. As I left her house, I knew the family I'd grown up with was changing, and so was I. 2 weeks after my parents' visit, I sat at my desk staring at a blank email draft. My hands hovered over the keyboard, the weight of what I was about to do pressing on my chest. I'd spent years trying to fit into their world, but the hurt they'd caused through words, actions, and public accusations had pushed me to a breaking point. I needed space, clarity, a line drawn in the sand. So I started typing, addressing the email to Susan, Thomas, and Jennifer. "I've tried to be part of this family," I wrote, my fingers steady despite the ache in my heart. "But your actions have made it clear I don't belong in your story. The way you've treated me, dismissed me, and twisted my intentions has to stop. I'm asking you not to contact me until I'm ready. Respect my boundaries." The words felt final, like closing a door I'd held open too long. I didn't mention the money or Dorothy, knowing it would only reignite their anger. I hit send, the soft click of the mouse echoing in my quiet apartment. A mix of relief and grief washed over me. Relief for standing my ground, grief for the family I'd never truly had. My phone buzzed almost immediately, but it wasn't them. It was my cousin Michael Harris, checking in as he'd done since the dinner. "You okay?" His text read simple but heavy with concern. I called him, needing to hear his voice. "I just sent an email to Mom, Dad, and Jennifer," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I told them not to contact me." There was a pause, then Michael's steady tone came through. "That took guts," he said. "You did what you needed to do. How do you feel?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Like I'm free, but also like I've lost something," I admitted. Michael listened, his silence patient, letting me unravel the tangle of emotions. "I didn't want it to come to this," I continued. "I kept hoping they'd see me, you know. But after everything, their words at the dinner, the posts, the rumors showing up at my place, it's too much." Michael's voice was calm but firm. "You're not wrong for protecting yourself," he said. "They've had years to do better. You gave them chances." We talked for nearly an hour, his words grounding me. Michael didn't sugarcoat things, but he didn't judge either. He'd seen the way Susan and Thomas favored Jennifer, how they'd overlooked me since we were kids. "You've been carrying their weight too long," he said. Let them figure out their mess. You've got Dorothy, and you've got me. His support was like a lifeline pulling me through the guilt that threatened to creep in. I thought of Dorothy, her quiet strength, and felt a flicker of peace knowing my choice to honor her was right. Later that evening, I checked my email half expecting a reply from my mom or sister. There was nothing. The silence was both a relief and a sting, proof that they'd received my message but weren't ready to respect it, or maybe didn't care enough to try. I didn't let myself dwell on it. Instead, I texted Michael thanking him for being there. Anytime he replied with a smiley face that made me laugh despite everything. It was a small thing, but it reminded me I wasn't alone. I stood and walked to my window looking out at the city lights. The email wasn't just words, it was a declaration. I'd spent so long trying to prove I was enough, but now I was choosing myself. Dorothy had her money, her gratitude, a constant reminder of why I'd done it. Michael's support gave me strength to keep going. My family might never understand, but I didn't need them to. For the first time, I felt like I was building a life on my terms, not theirs. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it. 4 months after I sent that email, the holiday season arrived, bringing a quiet kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I stood in Dorothy's living room, stringing lights on a small Christmas tree, the scent of pine and her homemade gingerbread filling the air. My grandmother hummed a carol, her hands steady as she hung ornaments, each one carrying a story from her past. My cousin Michael arrived with a tray of hot cocoa, his grin wide as he teased me about my lopsided star. The three of us laughed, the warmth of the moment wrapping around us like a blanket. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Dorothy's home was small, but alive with holiday cheer. We'd spent the day decorating, cooking, and swapping stories, no tension or expectations weighing us down. Michael had brought a playlist of old Christmas songs, and Dorothy insisted on teaching us her favorite recipe for pecan pie. The table was set for 3, a simple spread compared to the lavish family gatherings of the past, but it felt fuller than any of those ever had. As we sat down to eat, Dorothy raised her glass, her eyes soft. "To family," she said, looking at me and Michael. "The real kind." I clinked my glass against hers, a lump in my throat, knowing she meant it. Word had trickled in about my parents and sister, though I hadn't spoken to them since my email. Michael, always my link to family news, mentioned that Susan and Thomas had sold their house last month. The financial strain had forced them to downsize, moving to a smaller condo on the edge of town. Their social circle, once vibrant with relatives and friends, had dwindled further, with many still upset over how they'd handled the dinner fallout. My mom hadn't reached out, and my dad's silence spoke louder than words. I didn't wish them ill, but their absence from my life felt like a weight lifted. Jennifer's world had shifted too. Michael heard through mutual contacts that my sister's reputation had taken a lasting hit. Her colleagues at the bank, once impressed by her charm, now saw her as unreliable after the rumors she'd spread. Clients hesitated to work with her, and her social media, once filled with glowing posts, had gone quiet. She'd tried to rebuild her image, but the damage was done. I didn't feel joy at her struggles, only a quiet acceptance that her choices had shaped her path, just as mine had shaped my own. Sitting with Dorothy and Michael, I realized the lesson this year had taught me. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about who shows up, who sees you, who stays when things get hard. I'd spent so long chasing approval from people who couldn't give it, but Dorothy and Michael had been there all along, steady and unwavering. The money I'd given Dorothy wasn't just a gift. It was a choice to honor the love she'd always shown me. She used it wisely, treating herself to small joys, but her real gift was the way she made me feel whole. As we cleared the table, Michael nudged me, his voice low. "You did good, you know," he said, nodding toward Dorothy, who was wrapping leftovers, with a smile. "You built something real here." I nodded, my chest light. The Christmas lights glowed softly, casting a warm hue over the room. I didn't need a big family or a perfect story. I had Dorothy's laughter, Michael's loyalty, and a life I was finally choosing for myself. That was enough.